The hall buzzed with excitement as students from across the galaxy gathered under the holographic dome of the Universal Collegiate Arena. Towering Sarnites with shimmering scales, feathered Anvalorians with their sharp beaks, and even the insectoid Crixians clicked and chattered as they eyed one another. This was the stage for the Universal Collegiate Survival Games, a prestigious trial designed to push the galaxy's best minds and bodies to their limits. It wasn't just a competition, it was a test of worthiness. And then there was Jack Carter, standing alone near the edge of the crowd, adjusting a coil of rope slung over his shoulder. "Is that rope?" an Anvalorian with teal feathers scoffed, tilting his head in exaggerated disbelief. "Did the human forget what century it is?" Laughter rippled through the assembly. Beside him, a Crixian hissed in amusement, its mandibles clicking. "Primitive creatures. Their tools are as outdated as their biology." Jack ignored the jeers. He tightened the rope over his shoulder and adjusted the small utility knife clipped to his belt. In stark contrast to the other's sleek exosuits, gravity-modifying boots, and energy shields, Jack looked like a relic from a bygone age. His simple cargo pants, sturdy boots, and weathered jacket seemed out of place among the galaxy's elite. A low, resonant hum silenced the crowd. The dome above shimmered, displaying a three-dimensional map of the planet below. It was a kaleidoscope of danger, jagged cliffs, thick jungles, roiling swamps, and volcanic plains. Each region teemed with threats designed to test survival instincts. "Welcome, champions," the overseer announced, his voice deep and commanding. The figure, clad in a flowing metallic robe, stood at the center of the arena. "You represent your species, your civilizations, and your futures. Only the strongest, smartest, and most adaptable will succeed. The first challenge begins now." The map zoomed in, highlighting a distant valley surrounded by hazardous terrain. "Your objective, reach the Valley of Stars within 3 cycles. Collect resources, overcome obstacles, and prove your worth." As the overseer spoke, a dazzling array of survival tools appeared before the competitors: plasma cutters, terrain mapping drones, personal force fields. Students scrambled to grab their chosen gear, their movements frantic as they calculated what might give them the edge. Jack, however, didn't move. He had everything he needed. He caught the disapproving glare of an overseer assistant, who clearly questioned the wisdom of Earth's selection. "Are you certain about this?" she asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. "The tools are free for all contestants." Jack smiled politely. "Thanks, but I'll manage." The signal to begin came as a sharp chime, and the arena floor dissolved beneath them. One moment Jack was standing on polished stone, and the next he was hurtling through a beam of light, his stomach lurching as he was transported to the planet's surface. He landed with a thud on soft earth, the humid air immediately clinging to his skin. Jack rose to his feet, surveying his surroundings. Dense jungle stretched in every direction, the air alive with alien bird calls and the distant roar of some unseen predator. He uncoiled his rope and began tying knots, his hands moving with practiced ease. Around him, distant flashes of light marked the paths of other competitors as their high-tech gadgets activated, hoverboards zipping through the trees, drones scanning for threats. "Well," Jack muttered to himself, securing his pack. "Guess I'll do this the old-fashioned way." He moved with quiet efficiency, using the rope to climb a nearby tree for a better view. From his perch, he spotted a narrow canyon to the east that could save him hours of trekking through the jungle. It was risky. Canyons often hid predators, but Jack trusted his instincts. He marked the direction and descended. As he started toward the canyon, a loud crash echoed from nearby. He froze, scanning the jungle. A Crixian competitor stumbled into view, tangled in the vines of an oversized carnivorous plant. Its metallic limbs flailed as it hissed in panic, the vines pulling tighter. Jack hesitated. The alien had laughed at him just hours ago. It wasn't his problem. But then he sighed, slung the rope from his shoulder, and moved toward the struggling competitor. "Hold still," Jack called, throwing one end of the rope toward the Crixian. The alien hissed in confusion but grasped the rope's end. Bracing himself, Jack pulled with all his strength, the vines snapping under the combined force. The Crixian collapsed to the ground, clicking its mandibles in what Jack assumed was a grudging thank you. Before it could speak, Jack was already moving. "Don't mention it," he said over his shoulder. "And don't get eaten." As Jack disappeared into the jungle, the Crixian watched, its derision replaced with a flicker of curiosity. By nightfall, the jungle was alive with distant cries of competitors battling the planet's dangers. But Jack moved steadily toward the canyon, his rope coiled once more. He didn't need their tech. He had something better: determination, ingenuity, and a good old-fashioned rope. The jungle's dense canopy filtered sunlight into scattered shafts, illuminating the alien world with an otherworldly green hue. Every step Jack took felt deliberate, each sound from the jungle around him a potential warning. The air was thick with humidity, clinging to his skin like a second layer, and the faint smell of decaying vegetation mixed with the sharper, metallic tang of alien flora. Jack paused, crouching to examine a strange plant with glowing, bulbous pods. He recognized the pattern from the briefing dossier: thornbust. A defensive plant that exploded into a shower of needle-like projectiles if disturbed. He gave it a wide berth, his movements slow and calculated. A distant explosion reverberated through the jungle, followed by a flash of light and the unmistakable hum of plasma energy. Someone had just found trouble, Jack thought. He adjusted his pack and moved on, his eyes scanning the terrain for the quickest route to the canyon. An Anvalorian hovered above the jungle floor on an anti-grav disc, its feathers shimmering with iridescence. The disc whined as it shifted to avoid a charging predator, a quadruped with crystalline scales that reflected the jungle in dizzying patterns. The predator lunged, its serrated jaws snapping just as the disc jerked upward, narrowly avoiding disaster. "Primitive planet," the Anvalorian muttered, frustrated. "Why didn't they warn us about?" The disc sputtered, sparks erupting from its edges as the planet's electromagnetic interference scrambled its circuitry. Before the Anvalorian could react, the disc plummeted, slamming into the ground. The predator closed in, its claws carving through the dirt with terrifying speed. Jack heard the roar and froze. His hand instinctively went to the rope slung over his shoulder. He moved quickly toward the source, climbing a thick tree to get a better vantage point. From his perch, he saw the Anvalorian pinned against a fallen log, its anti-grav disc sparking uselessly beside it. The predator, massive and shimmering, circled with predatory precision, its iridescent scales rippling as it prepared to pounce. Jack's instincts kicked in. He didn't have time to overthink it. He secured one end of his rope to the branch and tied a quick loop at the other. "Hey!" he shouted, hurling a rock at the predator's flank. The beast turned, its reflective scales flaring with light as it focused on Jack. "Perfect!" He swung down from the branch, using the momentum to plant his feet on the predator's flank, driving it back with a satisfying thud. The beast snarled in confusion, and Jack used the moment to loop the rope around its neck, securing it to a nearby tree. The Anvalorian blinked in stunned disbelief. "You're insane." "Not insane," Jack replied, panting. "Just efficient." The predator thrashed against the rope, its powerful muscles straining, but Jack had tied the knot perfectly. The beast was going nowhere. Jack motioned to the Anvalorian. "You're welcome. Now move before it gets loose." The alien hesitated, its pride clearly warring with its survival instincts. Finally, it nodded, retrieving a compact plasma blade from its belt and cutting free a path through the dense foliage. Jack didn't wait for thanks. He untied the rope, letting the predator retreat, and climbed back into the trees to continue his journey. By the time he reached the canyon, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the jungle in shades of purple and gold. The valley stretched out below him, a jagged scar in the earth that teemed with alien flora glowing softly in the twilight. The steep walls looked almost impossible to descend without equipment, but Jack's gaze fixed on a series of natural outcroppings that could work as makeshift anchors for his rope. He uncoiled it, tying a secure knot around a sturdy tree trunk. Slowly, he began his descent, testing each step before committing his weight. The silence of the canyon was oppressive, broken only by the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. As he neared the bottom, Jack spotted something shimmering in the moonlight, a vein of elthium ore, known for its high energy output and rarity. Jack made a mental note of the location. Resources like this could be critical for future challenges. For now, he focused on reaching the valley floor safely. At the base of the canyon, Jack surveyed his surroundings. The jungle here was denser, the air heavy with the scent of sap and minerals. A nearby stream sparkled, its waters oddly reflective, as though infused with liquid crystal. It would serve as a good place to refill his canteen. As he crouched to drink, movement caught his eye. A shadow shifted in the underbrush, a competitor, silent and watching. Jack pretended not to notice, his mind racing. Was it friend or foe? Either way, he tightened his grip on the rope, ready for whatever came next. The jungle was alive with threats, and Jack Carter was far from finished. The canyon walls towered above Jack like ancient sentinels, their jagged surfaces slick with alien moss that shimmered faintly in the morning light. At the top, barely visible from this distance, the prized zoretha fruit hung from thick, twisting vines. Its iridescent surface pulsed faintly, a clear marker of its extraordinary value. Other competitors were already at the base of the cliff, inspecting their high-tech gear with expressions of determination or frustration. Hover boots sputtered against the planet's interference, anti-grav harnesses flickered as their systems failed, and drones struggled to maintain balance in the unpredictable winds that whistled through the canyon. Jack approached the group, his coiled rope slung casually over one shoulder. The others barely glanced his way, their focus on their own struggles. Still clinging to that rope, human, a towering sarnite sneered. Its translucent scales caught the sunlight, shimmering like molten glass. Let me guess, you're going to lasso your way to the top? Jack gave a small shrug. Something like that. The sarnite's mocking laughter was joined by a few others, but Jack ignored them. He steadied the cliff, noting every ledge, crack, and overhang. Where others saw an obstacle, Jack saw a path. An Anvalorian competitor strapped on a sleek jetpack, its metallic wings extending with a mechanical hum. With a burst of energy, the competitor launched skyward, leaving a trail of shimmering particles in its wake. The others watched in silent awe as the bird-like figure soared gracefully, darting between outcroppings. Then, with a sudden, sharp pop, the jetpack stuttered, its propulsion system overwhelmed by the canyon's electromagnetic interference. The Anvalorian plummeted, wings flapping in a desperate attempt to slow the fall. The crowd gasped as the competitor crashed into an outcropping, tumbling the rest of the way down to the rocky floor. The sarnite clicked its tongue. Weak. Jack knelt by the fallen competitor, who groaned in pain. You all right? He asked. The Anvalorian nodded weakly. Systems failed. Figures, Jack muttered. He offered a hand, helping the competitor to a nearby boulder. Stay put. I'll handle the rest. Jack stood at the base of the cliff and uncoiled his rope, securing one end to a sturdy anchor point. His movements were deliberate, practiced, a craftsman preparing his tools. He threw the rope upward, looping it over a protruding rock. Pulling it taut, he tested the knot before starting his ascent. Hand over hand, he climbed steadily. His boots found small footholds, his fingers gripping the rock with practiced precision. Every movement was calculated, his body moving as if in harmony with the cliff. Halfway up, he paused on a narrow ledge, looking down. The competitors below had stopped their futile attempts to use technology and were now watching him in silence. A smooth section of rock jetted outward, offering no clear holds. Jack looped the rope around a nearby crack and fashioned a harness, using it to swing across the gap. He landed on the other side with a grunt, securing himself before moving on. Above him, the zoretha fruit swayed gently in the wind, tantalizingly close. But he wasn't the only one with his eyes on the prize. A shadow moved on the cliff face, a Crixian competitor, scaling the wall with clawed limbs. The insectoid creature moved with unnerving speed, its compound eyes fixed on the glowing fruit. Jack narrowed his eyes. The Crixian was fast, but it lacked caution. Sure enough, one of its claws slipped on the mossy surface, sending it tumbling. The Crixian barely caught itself on an outcropping, clinging desperately. Need a hand? Jack called out, his voice steady. The Crixian hesitated, pride warring with practicality. Finally, it nodded. Jack tossed his rope, the end landing near the alien. The Crixian grabbed it, and Jack anchored himself, pulling the competitor up to a safer position. You didn't have to do that, the Crixian said, its mandibles clicking in what passed for gratitude. Survival's not just about winning, Jack replied, resuming his climb. It's about making it through. Moments later, Jack reached the summit. The Zoretha fruit was within arm's reach, glowing with an almost hypnotic beauty. He pulled his utility knife from his belt, slicing the stem cleanly. As soon as he held it in his hand, a triumphant chime echoed through the canyon. Below, the competitors stared in stunned silence. Jack raised the fruit, his rope coiled at his side, and began his descent. By the time he reached the base, the Sarnite was no longer mocking him. It stared at the fruit, then at Jack, and growled, "How?" Jack smiled faintly, patting the rope slung over his shoulder. Sometimes, it's not about the tools you have. It's about knowing how to use them. Without another word, he walked past the gathering crowd, the Zoretha fruit tucked safely in his pack. The next challenge awaited, and Jack was ready. The summit was quiet, almost unnervingly so. Jack's descent with the Zoretha fruit had been smooth, but now that he was at the valley floor, something felt off. The jungle ahead, thick with alien flora glowing faintly in the dim light, was eerily silent. The usual chorus of distant roars, chirps, and rustles had faded, replaced by an oppressive stillness. Jack tightened his grip on his rope, his instincts humming with unease. He scanned the area, his eyes darting between the shadows cast by the alien canopy. Whatever was out there, it was watching him. He didn't have to wait long. A low, guttural growl rumbled from the underbrush. Slowly, a hulking predator emerged from the shadows, its body sleek and sinuous, like a panther crossed with a serpent. Its scales shimmered with shifting colors, blending seamlessly with its surroundings. Its eyes, slit-pupilled and glowing faintly, locked onto Jack with predatory intent. "Well," Jack muttered, slipping the Zoretha fruit into his pack. "This just got interesting." Jack didn't move. He knew better than to run. Predators like this thrived on panic, and any sudden motion would trigger its attack. Instead, he kept his breathing steady, his mind racing for a plan. The creature lunged suddenly, its speed almost supernatural. Jack dove to the side, rolling to his feet just as its claws raked the ground where he had been standing. Without hesitation, he looped his rope over a low-hanging branch and secured it with a quick knot, creating a makeshift snare. "Come on," Jack whispered, backing toward the trap. The predator stalked him, its muscles rippling under its iridescent hide. It crouched, preparing to pounce, and Jack braced himself. The moment the creature leapt, Jack yanked the rope. The snare tightened, catching the beast's forelimb mid-air and pulling it off balance. It crashed to the ground with a furious roar, thrashing against the restraint. Jack didn't wait to see if the trap held. He sprinted toward a cluster of trees, using his rope to swing across a narrow ravine. The predator's roar followed him, echoing through the jungle. Jack had barely landed when the predator freed itself, tearing through the snare with sheer brute strength. It charged after him, its glowing eyes blazing with fury. Jack's mind raced. He needed to slow it down, buy himself time to think. He reached for his utility knife and slashed at a thick vine hanging from a nearby tree. The severed vine whipped downward, releasing a cascade of sticky, luminescent sap onto the predator. The creature skidded to a halt, momentarily disoriented as the sap hardened around its legs like quick-drying cement. "Not bad," Jack muttered, panting. "But it's not enough." He scanned his surroundings, his gaze landing on a cluster of jagged rocks nearby. An idea formed. He grabbed his rope, fashioned a loop at one end, and began to climb the nearest tree. The predator broke free of the sap with a deafening roar, its glowing eyes snapping toward Jack. It charged the tree, its claws raking the bark as it tried to climb after him. Jack swung his rope, looping it over a sturdy branch, and secured it around the largest rock in the cluster below. "Come on, big guy," Jack taunted, climbing higher. The predator snarled, leaping up the tree with terrifying speed. Jack waited until it was almost upon him, then yanked the rope. The rock below shifted, dislodged from its precarious position. Gravity did the rest. The boulder tumbled down, striking the tree with a thunderous crack and sending both the predator and part of the trunk crashing to the ground. Jack climbed down cautiously, his eyes on the dazed predator. It lay among the shattered branches, breathing heavily but still alive. He tightened his grip on his rope, ready to act if it moved. But it didn't. Instead, it struggled to its feet, snarled one last time, and slinked back into the shadows, defeated but not broken. "Yeah," Jack said, coiling his rope. "You better run." The jungle had come alive again, the silence replaced by its usual cacophony. Jack felt the tension ease slightly, but he didn't let his guard down. The encounter had cost him precious time, and the Zoretha fruit in his pack wouldn't stay safe forever. Other competitors would be converging on the valley soon, and not all of them would be as straightforward as the predator. As he reached the edge of the jungle, the next challenge loomed into view. A vast swamp stretched out before him, its surface dotted with acidic pools that hissed and bubbled ominously. The air was thick with the acrid stench of decay, and faint ripples hinted at unseen dangers lurking beneath the water. Jack tightened the straps on his pack and adjusted his rope. The predator had been a warm-up. The swamp, he knew, would be the real test. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. The swamp stretched endlessly before Jack, a grim expanse of bubbling pools and twisted, skeletal trees rising from the muck like the fingers of a drowning giant. The air was thick with acrid fumes, burning his nostrils and leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. Jack tightened his pack straps and checked his rope, coiled neatly at his side. This wasn't just a swamp, it was a graveyard for those who underestimated it. The acidic pools shimmered with unnatural colors, shifting blues, greens, and purples, like a toxic oil slick. Every so often, a bubble would rise to the surface and pop with a sharp hiss, releasing tendrils of noxious gas into the air. Jack's instincts screamed at him to stay alert. The swamp wasn't just deadly, it was alive. Jack stepped carefully onto what looked like a solid patch of ground, only to feel it shift beneath his feet. He jumped back just as the ground dissolved into a pool of sludge, the acidic liquid eating away at a nearby branch in seconds. "Right," Jack muttered, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Watch where I step." He crouched, uncoiling his rope, and tied a loop at the end. Swinging it with practiced ease, he snagged a sturdy branch overhead and used it to swing across the unstable ground. The maneuver was smooth, but Jack knew the swamp wouldn't make it that easy the whole way. A sarnite stomped through the muck, its shimmering scales protecting it from the acidic pools, but doing little to help its progress. Nearby, a Crixian tried using its sharp claws to leap from one patch of stable ground to another but misjudged the distance. The alien shrieked as it tumbled into a shallow pool, scrambling out with smoking limbs, its mandibles clicking in pain. Jack landed lightly on a moss-covered log, pausing to survey the terrain. A faint path emerged in the chaos, a series of gnarled roots and fallen branches that formed a makeshift bridge through the swamp. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As he prepared to move, a flicker of motion caught his eye. A shadow slid beneath the surface of the largest pool, its movements smooth and deliberate. Jack's gut twisted. Something was hunting them. A massive serpent-like creature erupted from the nearest pool, its translucent body glistening with acid. It moved with impossible speed, its jaws snapping shut around a nearby competitor, a feathered Anvalorian. The alien let out a piercing cry before being dragged beneath the surface, leaving only a cloud of bubbles and the faint hiss of dissolving flesh. Jack didn't hesitate. He swung his rope again, using it to gain higher ground on a cluster of tangled roots. The serpent turned its glowing eyes toward him, its body coiling like a spring. "Great," Jack muttered, gripping his rope tightly. Because today wasn't dangerous enough already. The serpent lunged, its massive body smashing through the roots where Jack had been standing moments before. He swung to a nearby branch, narrowly avoiding the acidic splash as the predator's tail whipped through the air. Jack's mind raced. The creature wasn't just dangerous, it was smart, driving its prey into the swamp's traps. If he wanted to survive, he couldn't just evade it. He had to outwit it. He spotted a cluster of sharp, jagged rocks jutting out from a shallow pool. If he could lure the serpent there, its momentum might do the rest. He secured his rope to a sturdy tree and dangled the other end like bait, swinging it just above the serpent's head. "Come on," Jack muttered, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. "You want me? Come and get me." The serpent hissed, its glowing eyes locking onto the rope. With a thunderous lunge, it launched itself at Jack. He swung wide at the last second, narrowly avoiding the snapping jaws as the creature slammed into the rocks. The impact was catastrophic. The jagged stones pierced the serpent's body, releasing a burst of acidic ichor that hissed and bubbled as it seeped into the swamp. The creature writhed for a moment, then fell still, its glowing eyes dimming. Jack didn't wait to celebrate. He swung to the next patch of solid ground, landing with a thud. Behind him, the swamp began to settle, the danger momentarily abated. As Jack moved deeper into the swamp, he wasn't alone for long. A Crixian competitor emerged from the shadows, its mandibles clicking in a mixture of wariness and admiration. "You killed it," it said, its voice a low hiss. Jack nodded, his eyes scanning the terrain ahead. It was kill or be killed. Same rule applies to the rest of this swamp. The Crixian hesitated before stepping closer. "Perhaps we work together." Jack considered the offer. The swamp was treacherous, and an ally, even a temporary one, could be useful. He nodded. "Fine. But don't slow me down." The two moved forward, their uneasy alliance forged in the shadow of the swamp's dangers. Ahead, the terrain grew even more unpredictable, and the faint glow of the next checkpoint shimmered in the distance. The swamp was behind them, but Jack knew the hardest test was yet to come. The final challenge loomed ahead, a vast cave system carved into the side of a jagged mountain. Its entrance glowed faintly, pulsing with the soft hues of alien minerals embedded in the rock. Inside, the air buzzed with energy, a clear sign the overseers had designed this trial to test more than just physical endurance. This was a place where wits, creativity, and adaptability would decide the victor. Jack adjusted the straps of his pack, his rope hanging at his side. Beside him, the Crixian competitor he had partnered with in the swamp stood silently, its mandibles clicking faintly in anticipation. Other competitors trickled into the clearing, their numbers greatly reduced from the start of the games. Bruised, battered, and wary, they glanced at each other with a mixture of respect and suspicion. The overseer's voice boomed from nowhere, as it had throughout the games. "The final trial awaits. Within this labyrinth lies the key to your victory, the Orb of Ascendance. Only the cleverest and most resourceful will claim it. Beware, this test will exploit your weaknesses and reward your strengths. Proceed at your own risk." With that, the ground beneath them shifted, and the entrance to the cave yawned open further, inviting them in. As Jack and the Crixian stepped inside, the air grew colder, and the faint glow from the walls pulsed in time with their footsteps. The ground beneath them was uneven, the path twisting unpredictably. Above, crystalline stalactites reflected distorted versions of the competitors, making it difficult to judge the layout of the cavern. "We stay together," Jack said, his voice low. "This place is meant to confuse us. Watch your footing and trust your instincts." The Crixian clicked in agreement. "And trust each other, for now." The first obstacle came quickly. A narrow corridor opened into a vast chamber filled with floating platforms, each shifting unpredictably in the air. Between them, a glowing chasm pulsed with energy that promised instant death for anyone who fell. The platforms seemed to respond to the competitors' movements, tilting and spinning whenever someone leapt to one. A Sarnite competitor roared as it attempted to leap across the platforms, its massive frame destabilizing the precarious path. It slipped, plummeting into the chasm with a flash of light. Jack studied the scene, his mind racing. "Weight distribution," he muttered. "Too much force makes them unstable." He uncoiled his rope, tying a quick loop at one end. "I'll go first," he told the Crixian. "You anchor me, and I'll pull you across once I've got a secure point." The Crixian hesitated, then nodded, wrapping its claws around the rope's other end. Jack took a deep breath and jumped to the nearest platform, landing lightly. The surface wobbled, but he quickly crouched to lower his center of gravity. With careful movements, he threw the rope to the next platform, lassoing a crystal outcrop for balance as he continued forward. One by one, they crossed, their progress slow but steady. Jack's calculated approach kept them stable, while the Crixian's sharp reflexes caught the rope when it slipped. By the time they reached the other side, most of the other competitors had fallen behind, either struggling with the platforms or falling victim to their impatience. In one chamber, intricate puzzles of light and shadow barred their way, requiring competitors to manipulate beams of energy to unlock the next passage. Jack's rope once again proved invaluable, allowing him to redirect the beams by anchoring reflective surfaces at precise angles. In another, the ground split into hexagonal tiles that lit up with different colors. A wrong step triggered sharp, needle-like spikes to erupt from the floor. The Crixian's multifaceted eyes spotted the pattern, while Jack used his rope to test tiles from a safe distance. Piece by piece, the labyrinth's secrets unfolded, testing not only their skills but also their trust in one another. The orb of ascendance hovered in the center of the room, encased in a field of energy that shimmered like water. Surrounding it, holographic projections of the competitor's greatest fears flickered into existence. For Jack, it was a massive void, infinite and suffocating, threatening to swallow him whole. For the Crixian, it was an immense shadow with burning eyes, its mandibles clicking with malevolent intent. The room seemed to react to their fear, the projections growing stronger and more vivid with each passing second. Jack gritted his teeth, forcing himself to focus. "It's not real," he muttered. "It's just another test." The Crixian struggled, its claws scraping the ground as it backed away. "It feels real." Jack grabbed his rope and threw it around the projection, the fibers passing through the illusion as if it were mist. He pulled the Crixian upright. "Trust me. It's fake. We've come too far to let this stop us." Together, they pushed forward, their fear giving way to determination. As they reached the orb, the energy field pulsed violently, threatening to knock them back. Jack tied his rope around a nearby crystal for stability, anchoring himself as he reached for the orb. The moment his hand closed around it, the room went still. The labyrinth dissolved into a shimmering light, and Jack found himself back at the starting point of the games. The remaining competitors stared at him in awe. In his hand, the orb of ascendance glowed faintly, its energy a testament to his victory. The overseer's voice boomed once more. "The human has prevailed, not through brute strength or advanced technology, but through adaptability, ingenuity, and collaboration. A lesson to us all." Jack glanced at the Crixian, nodding in acknowledgement. "Good work." The Crixian clicked its mandibles, its tone respectful. "You as well, human." As Jack stepped forward, the crowd erupted in cheers, but he didn't bask in the glory. He had proven what humanity was capable of, not just survival, but triumph in the face of overwhelming odds. And he'd done it with nothing more than a rope, a knife, and the will to adapt.